Have you ever had the experience where you have a close friend in your inner circle and you love them, you respect them, you value their input, you're glad they're a part of your life, and you know them, you feel like you know them really well. And then someone or something comes along, whether it's tabloids or rumors, and tells you or shares information about that individual that is not in the most positive light. What do you do with that information? Does that change how you feel about that person? That's the dilemma that we're faced with here as we continue our reading of To Kill a Mockingbird. Our study today is the beloved Atticus Finch and his evil twin. Now, when we think of Atticus, we know that he is well loved and revered and respected. And everything we know of Atticus as we read To Kill a Mockingbird, we know him to be noble, he's kind, he's patient, he's level-headed, he's honest, he's decent, he's disciplined, he's compassionate, he's thoughtful, he's all of those things and more, right? I adore Atticus. I think of him, if this were a real person, man, he would be one of those people I'd want as a part of my circle. And so as we think about Atticus, even attorneys and lawyers, they respect the character of Atticus, this fictional character. There's this obsession with Atticus, right? It's so much of an obsession that I think in 2014, the name Atticus was one of the top 1,000 names given to children at birth in this country. Atticus. Right? So interesting, even though he is not the central figure in this text, he certainly is an important person or character that moves the plot and the theme along. So here are some things that we know about Atticus. We know that he is a noble character because in To Kill a Mockingbird, he takes on a case that's a losing battle. He knows in advance he's not going to win. We know the end of this conflict or this case is that the character of Tom Robinson is not going to find any sort of justice, right? We know the outcome is indicative of the Southern life and that it also reflects a Jim Crow society. We also know that in this case, the character of Tom Robinson is also considered the scapegoat. So someone has to take the fall for this. And in this case, it's him. Nevertheless, we have the character of Atticus who stands in his defense and represents Tom Robinson. That's a noble thing to do. So we see Atticus as someone who is courageous, he's brave. There's so many more things that you could say about the character of Atticus. Also, we know that he puts a lot on the line. Because of his attempts at justice, we know that Atticus risked his social standing, right, in society. We remember we looked at where he stood in terms of his, where he is in terms of all the other characters in the text. He risked his personal or professional reputation. And he risked his physical safety. All of these we're going to see play out in To Kill a Mockingbird. And when I think of someone who puts everything on the line and our modern day Atticus, I think of like Kaepernick in football, right? He risked his professional career, his reputation, all sorts of things. So there are characters like that, and we want to know where we saw it first, and that is with Atticus. Now, the other thing about Atticus is very decisive, right? We know that he is an honest and fair character. And so the way in which this is played out is we see the character, the narrator, Scout, who everything we learn about Atticus comes from Scout. And she is sharing her sentiments on the case of Tom Robinson. Initially, she shared her sentiments about Boo Radley and all of this sort of, we see the evolution of this character, the narrator, Scout Finch, right? And then we have Tom's side, which in this case, I assigned him as the victim. Some people might say he's the perpetrator. And then we also have Mayella, which we'll be introduced to later in To Kill a Mockingbird, who in this case is the perpetuator. But with all of this information being thrown at Atticus, he has to make a decision. right? He's very decisive about what is right and what is wrong, and in any case seeks justice at all means necessary. So we think of Atticus to the rescue, right? He saves the town from a dog with rabies. He represents Macomb County in the state legislature. He exposes the people of Macomb County to their own hypocrisy. There's so much that he does. Many people say he's this racial hero in not only the text, but in life. In fact, many argue that before Martin Luther King, Atticus was the character who sort of proposed this idea of nonviolence in terms of protest. It was Atticus who started this, right? And so we think very highly of Atticus. We see him as an outstanding character and individual. But now we're faced with a dilemma, because everything that we know about Atticus is from the character Scout, and everything we know about Scout is from Harper Lee. So there's two versions of the narrative that depicts Atticus and reflects Lee's insight into her father's experience. A.C. Wells, which is actually which is the narrator, or Harper Lee, the author, her father was an editor, and then Harper Lee wrote for a column for a college paper. So you could actually take their works and you could look at it side by side and see like the struggle they had. But the obsession with Atticus as the fictional character is real and unusual. In fact, you can see that there's even a book about Atticus, right? It says Atticus Finch, and there's like a biography. Who writes a biography about a fictional character? That's how obsessed everyone is with Atticus. And the dilemma is what to make of the adverse details of the original Atticus. And I say that because there's a new text that was published years later, and you can probably see this, right? A new text, and it's Harper Lee Ghost Set on a Watchman, and it presents Atticus in a whole new light. He's no longer this wonderful, noble, kind, tolerant individual. He's different, and so we have to look at Go Set on a Watchman and then To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and they present the character of Atticus in two different ways. So I know you would never have imagined that Atticus would say something like, the Negroes down here are still in their childhood as a people, or ask his daughter, do you want Negroes by the carload in our schools and churches and theaters? Do you want them in our world? This is an excerpt from the Go Set on a Watchman. Now, we know the Atticus that says, of course I defend blacks. Don't say the N-word, Scout. That's common. You're one less individual who will make those comments. So now we're going to be introduced to this evil twin, which is Atticus, that was constructed by Harper Lee based on her perception of A.C. Wells, her own father. So let's do the juxtaposition between Go Set on a Watchman and To Kill a Mockingbird that presents the same characters, all of which the same characters in these two books here. Go Set on a Watchman was originally rejected. This was written first. This text that projects the Atticus Finch in a negative light was written first. And this was rejected. It was actually published in 2015. It's the character of Atticus shared the sentiments of, let's say, a 70-year-old white man in the Deep South. Not a good thing, right? And Scout as the narrator as an adult, not a 6-year-old Scout, but as an adult who lives in New York City, who's removed from Macomb County. Okay. Also, Harper Lee's attorney discovered this draft in 2015 in her safe deposit box. So this book was written before this one. This one, Atticus is not the wonderful person that we think he is. Perhaps some would even argue that he could be racist. And in this text, we know him to be noble and respectful and tolerant. Now, also in Go Set on a Watchman, Jem, the character of Jem, is dead. So if we look at the character of Atticus in To Kill a Mockingbird, it was written 2 years after Go Set a Watchman, published in 1960. To Kill a Mockingbird, written as a result of the initial novel being rejected. So Harper Lee presented this novel, it was rejected. So while this one was being reviewed, she then decided to go ahead and start writing this one. The character of Atticus is portrayed as noble and a decent man. Scout, widely accepted novel, which is this one, right? Harper Lee received a Pulitzer Prize in 1961. In this case, we know Jem is alive and well, and the fate of Tom Robinson, we know, is found guilty. And then the fate of Tom Robinson here is he's acquitted. The interesting facts as we re-examine our interpretation of Atticus Finch from both To Kill a Mockingbird and Go Set a Watchman by Harper Lee, it's very off-putting to think my Atticus, my dear Atticus, who I revered and adored so much, is not the Atticus that was originally created by Harper Lee to reflect justice in the South. We know that Go Set on a Watchman was her first novel that was put away and hidden away in a safe deposit box, and it was rejected. This was rejected, and I can see why, because they portrayed Atticus to be this horrible individual. And then we have the Atticus that we all know and love from To Kill a Mockingbird, that we respect. What do we do with this information? Does that change things? I don't know that it changes anything for me because, I didn't go through the experience with Atticus and Go Set on a Watchman. I do know him very well from To Kill a Mockingbird, and that's who I'm sticking with.